are no strangers to natural disasters here in the Pacific Northwest, whether it be wildfires, extreme heat, or ice storms. And data shows a shifting global climate is making them more frequent and costly, and understanding the science and politics behind them is more important than ever. Joining us today is Jeff Goodell, an award-winning journalist and author. Goodell has been covering climate change and its effects for more than 2 decades. His most recent book, Heat Will Kill You First: Life and Death on a Scorching Planet, looks at the ways our planet is changing, particularly when it comes to extreme heat events. Goodell has also been awarded a 2020 Guggenheim Fellowship in General Nonfiction for his work. Jeff, thanks so much for being here today.
Nice to be here.
We appreciate you stopping in.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you first, your newest book is now a New York Times bestseller, The Heat Will Kill You First. It was also selected as one of the best books of the year by NPR, The Economist, and the LA Times. It's made a huge impact. Now, in your book, you make the argument that heat is the biggest threat to humans and our world. Why was it important for you to write this book?
Well, I've been writing about climate change for a long time, 25 years or so. And, there's a lot of aspects to climate change, from droughts to increased hurricane intensities to, there's many ways of thinking about climate change. But heat is the one that is most dangerous to us as people, as humans, as people who lived through the heat dome in 2021 here in the Pacific Northwest saw. I mean, it is what I call in the book, a predatory force. It goes after people who are the most vulnerable in our society. And I think that it's also accelerating most quickly of all the sort of impacts of continuing to burn fossil fuels. And so I think it's important for people to understand the risks. And that's basically why I wrote the book.
Well, you mentioned the heat dome in 2021, which was an extreme heat event. It was so disastrous, so devastating here. It included the dozens of deaths, sadly, in Oregon and Multnomah County. This happened in 2021. Now, many of the people who died were in their homes and they didn't have access to air conditioning. Now, we know this trend is happening all over the world where many people don't have the luxury of cooling. And as we see our heat rising, it becomes very dangerous, whether that's in a food truck or working on a farm or in a field. So how can we as a system and as people do better to keep people safe as this change continues?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, one is access to air conditioning, right? Having more and more access to air conditioning, helping people. One of the big issues with air conditioning is just paying your electric bill because it's expensive to run air conditioning. So figuring out ways to subsidize that and to just get more people to have air conditioning. But it's more than that, right? It's also about communicating better, media organizations doing a better job of communicating about heat waves and the risks and what to do about them. I live in Texas where there are flash floods, and everywhere I was at a Starbucks yesterday morning, and right outside of Starbucks, it has a sign in the parking lot about what to do if there's a flash flood. We have nothing like that about heat waves. People don't understand what to do. Do I open the windows? Do I close the windows? Do I put the shades down? What do I do? Do I drink more water? How do I, so there's a lot of education to be done and a lot of messaging to be done about it. We have very clear threat risks about, like hurricanes, for example, Category 1, Category 2, Category 3. Everybody knows what that means. They know if it's a Category 3, Category 4, it's a serious hurricane. We don't do that with heat waves. All we say is it's going to be hot. And people don't understand kind of what that means or what the lethal thresholds are. So there's a lot to do with just educating people and doing a better job of being proactive about what to do when a heat wave is coming.
You wrote an essay recently in the New York Times that kind of talked about an interesting impact of this heat is that many people who have air conditioning or who have resources or have more privilege are not as in danger to what we will see as it continues to this heat. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, in the New York Times piece, I wrote about the sort of what I call the divide between the cooled and the cooked, which maybe is a kind of blunt way to put it, but I think it's very real. And, people like you and I we're in an air-conditioned office right now, studio right now. We live in, I don't know if your house is air-conditioned, but many people do have air conditioning, have access to cooling. They're not working outside. They're not, doing roofing on a really hot day in the middle of summer. They're not postal workers. FedEx delivery people, agricultural workers whose job depends on being outside and don't have the luxury of saying, I want to go inside for a 2-hour break right now. And so the effects of this warming that we're seeing and these kinds of heat domes and heat waves are borne much more heavily on these outdoor workers who do not have the luxury of retreating to cool spaces the way we do.
Now, this is a big question, but what are the biggest culprits that are contributing to this rising heat we're seeing?
Well, I mean, that's a sort of very simple question. I mean, it's burning fossil fuels, right? 70% of the CO2 that's going up into the atmosphere is from burning fossil fuels. So when you start to think about what do we do about heat and extreme heat, the first thing we have to do is think about how to more quickly get off of fossil fuels and shift to clean, renewable energy. That's, number one thing that we need to do. The other thing is thinking differently about our built spaces, about access to cooling, as I talked about, shade in neighborhoods. It's a very clear throughout, not just in Portland, but in every city, that richer neighborhoods have much more shade, much more parks, much more access to swimming pools and things like that. Poorer neighborhoods have much less, so that addressing that is a big issue also.
At the federal level, we're seeing changes right now when it comes to climate policy. We're seeing rollbacks on protections and provisions promoting more use of fossil fuels. What are you watching most closely right now when it comes to legislation or policy?
Well, there's so much going on. I mean, rollbacks is a gentle way of putting it. I mean, we're seeing a full-scale assault on climate science and a full-scale push on fossil fuels. And, there's so much going on right now on this, it is sort of hard to keep my eye on everything. I mean, the push right now to roll back at the EPA this thing called the endangerment finding, which is the basis for a lot of regulation about CO2, which basically says that climate change is dangerous and it has health effects, which is a straightforward answer. It's obviously been studied at great length by scientists. It's very clear, and yet the Trump administration is trying to roll that back to allow more fossil fuels to be burned and to kind of, bury the science on climate change and deny that it's a serious issue. And if anyone knows that climate change is a serious issue, it's the people who live in Oregon and in Portland who saw a very clear example of this with the heat dome in 2021 and how brutal and devastating and deadly it can be.
When we hear about warnings about climate change and our planet, it can be very overwhelming, right? It can be very, how do I play a role in helping this situation? So what can be done around this for people?
Well, there's lots to be done, and I think that there's no simple answer for, one thing obviously is voting for candidates who care about this and think about this. Another is talking about it, not being afraid to talk about it and to educate yourself around the science. But really, it's about what you're good at. I'm a writer. I'm good at writing stories and doing journalism and interpreting science. So that's what I do. You're a newscaster. You're having me on the air. We're talking about this. Other people are, educators, teachers who can talk about this. If you're a Wall Street investor looking at revenue streams and investment streams about this, if you're an artist incorporating this into your art, it's about figuring out what you're good at and then applying this to that.
Do you think there are a few specific things that everyone can do, maybe, or anyone can do on a day-to-day basis, whether that, is, I don't know, just choosing a way to live your life differently? Like, what would that be if you were going to tell everyone that you could speak to? Just try this one thing, to make an impact. What would it be?
Well, I think trying the one thing to make an impact, there's two things. One is to reduce your energy consumption to the degree that you can, because ultimately that is the problem, right? And the second thing is to talk about this, to have a conversation with your neighbor, to have a conversation with your son or daughter or father or grandfather or coworkers, and begin to take this out of any kind of science ghetto or something like that, and to realize that this is our world now. Our world is changing fast. the better we understand this changing world, the better we'll be able to cope with the risks in our own way.
It is hard, I think, for a lot of people to want to talk about it. So, I think it's helpful when you say, just maybe start small or read more or talk to somebody else, about what you can do every day. So you're in Oregon this week for a lecture at Pacific University. It's clearly important to you to educate and speak to younger generations. Why is that?
Because I think that we're at an inflection point in our world, and it's not just about shifting from fossil fuels to cleaner, cheaper energy. I think we have this opportunity, if we understand what's going on, to build a better world. I think that there is an opportunity to construct houses in ways that are more comfortable, easier to live in, are not dependent upon this mechanical clanking air conditioning, to have cars and electric transportation that is cleaner and more efficient than the old V8s and SUVs that people have been driving, to organize cities in new ways with more green space, more bicycling. I think that there's a real opportunity to use this not as a kind of doomsday story, but as a let's build a better world story. And I think that the opportunities are all around us.
Okay. If you want to leave a note for any of our viewers with all of your kind of work and all of your expertise around this, the climate and environment, what would you want them to take away from this?
That we're just at the beginning of thinking about this. This is a long story that's going to play out in all of our lives, for not just our lives, but for generations. And to begin to think about it that way, that this is not something that's going to go away. We're living in a rapidly changing world, and we need to think about that and use it to our advantage.
Jeff Goodell, thank you so much for coming in today. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
And thanks so much for joining us here on Straight Talk. If you have an idea or person you'd like us to interview, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us an email to the address on your screen, straighttalk@kgw.com. And a reminder, you can stream Straight Talk on your own schedule. You can download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV.